AI agents will soon outnumber human employees. That's at least a theory. But how do you secure your business when AI agents transact with your teams and agents, when AI agents operate in your network, and when nearly anyone on your team can or should build them? In today's episode, we'll talk about how to strengthen your enterprise security for agentic AI and multi-agent-to-agent communication. So let's jump right in. Awesome. Hey, welcome to What's the Buzz, where leaders share how they have turned AI hype into business outcomes. Today, we'll talk about how to strengthen your enterprise security for agentic AI and multi-agent-to-agent communication. And who better to talk about it than someone who is actively working on that? Steve Wilson. Hey, Steve, thank you so much for joining.
Hey, Andreas, thanks for having me back. I'm excited for the conversation today.
Wonderful. Hey, you're my go-to security expert for anything around AI. You've been on the show, I think now 5 times or something like that. And you know, we always have so much to talk about, and I love bringing you back because I see that the topic keeps evolving. You know, every quarter, every 6 months, there's something new to talk about, something that's really, really important. But you know, before I get too excited, maybe you can tell our audience a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I think I wear 3 or 4 different hats that are relevant to today's conversation. So my main hat that I wear is I'm the Chief AI and Product Officer at Exabeam, which is a cybersecurity company that's been using AI and machine learning for 10 years to improve the cybersecurity stance of our customers. And we've been shipping LLM-based co-pilots and agents as part of our product for 18 months now. So I have a lot of experience building those hands-on. The other things is I founded something called the OWASP Gen AI project, which is, if you are unfamiliar with OWASP, it's an open source foundation dedicated to building secure software. And about 2 years ago, we started developing guidance on how to build secure software with AI. Super hot topic for the last couple of years. And then also, I think Andreas and your book and my book came out the same week. I think it was right around the same time. So I did write a book for O'Reilly called The Developer's Playbook for Large Language Model Security.
That's awesome, right? And again, like I said, I think it was about 2 years ago that I first reached out to you when I saw the OWASP top 10 for large language models. And it's just amazing to see how things have progressed and how quickly they've evolved from that initial list. Yeah. So again, super excited about the conversation we'll have today. Now, folks, if you're just joining the stream, drop a comment in the chat where you're joining us from. I'm always curious to see how global our audience is again. And again, also don't forget to pick up your copy of the AI Leadership Handbook so you can learn how to turn technology hype into business outcomes. And like Steve said, he's got an excellent book as well around LLM security. Hold that up one more time. It's called The Developer's Playbook for Large Language Model Security by O'Reilly. So pick that up as well to strengthen your AI security. Now, with that out of the way, why don't we play a little game to kick things off? What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right. So in good old fashion, right? So this one, you know, I'll hit the buzzer. The wheels will start spinning. When they stop, you'll see a sentence. You know this by now. Okay. Right? I'd love for you to answer with the first thing that comes to mind and why in your own words. And to make it a little more interesting, you only have 60 seconds for your answer. So for those of you who are watching us live, drop your answer in the chat and why as well. So Steve, are you ready for What's the Buzz?
Let's do it.
Okay, so here we go. If AI were a band, what would it be? 60 seconds on the clock. Go.
All right. I'm going to go with my dad's favorite band, which is the Beatles. And I'm not old enough to remember this moment, but I remember my dad talking about it. There was a very sudden change from before anybody heard of the Beatles, and then one night they were on a big TV show in the United States and everybody knew about them, and that was kind of like the Chat GPT moment for the Beatles. After that, they were They were ubiquitous for a few years, but they always kept reinventing themselves. It's not like the Beatles music from 1969 sounded like the Beatles music from 1964. It sounded totally different. They kept reinventing themselves, but it was always the same thing. And at some point they disappeared, but they didn't really. At some point you can just listen to all of the popular music today and you can hear the Beatles and all of it. And I expect the place that where we're going is we're going to stop talking about AI companies like we stopped talking about web companies. There will just be companies. And just like we all use the web today, everybody will use AI tomorrow.
I love it. That's such a great analogy, right? It's really this evergreen thing to some extent, but also something that deeply influences everything else that comes after it. So great analogy. Speaking of these companies, and at some point we won't talk about AI companies anymore. At the moment we do, and we're seeing them, bring more and more AI agents on one hand into the market, and then those that adopt them bring them into their organizations. We see players like Google. They've announced protocols to enable agent-to-agent communication in multi-agent scenarios. Many others in the industry are getting behind it. It's great to see that there's some collaboration. Everybody realizes, we want to have these agents communicate with each other. And like I said, we've talked about the OWASP top 10 for LLMs previously. We talked about how that's evolved for Gen AI. And now here we are talking about how organizations that are letting LLMs on steroids loose on their systems and data are facing the next set of challenges. So I'm curious, what are you seeing when you talk to organizations around this topic of agents? Do they even have that on their radar yet? And what are the internal and external threats and challenges?
So obviously everybody's talking about agents. You can turn on, CNBC, which is the financial news network in the US, and all they talk about is AI and agents and things like that. But I think often people don't have any idea what they mean when they say AI agents. It's just the thing they say now instead of AI is they say agents. But I think you need to dissect the word a little bit to really get to the heart of it, because it's not like the concept is completely new. If you get under the word, AI agent, or even the more complicated hip word agentic, it's all about how much agency does something have. And, we've had concepts about granting agency for a very long time, right? I grant my lawyer agency to file papers on my behalf. That's where the basic concepts come from, is you're giving something the rights to do things on your behalf. And the way I look at agency is it's not a binary switch. It's not like it has agency or it's not. It's like a volume knob. It's like I'm giving this very little agency. And that's kind of your classic chatbot use case. It might have the agency to represent you as a company if it's your customer service chatbot, but at the end of the day, the worst it could do to someone is call them a bad name. But if we start to give it tools and give it access to do actions that are undoable, all of a sudden there's a lot more agency in these things. Do we give them the capability to act on their own? Chatbots never act on their own. You prompt them and they respond. And it's always that very simple interaction. These agents tend to have longer running processes, and those could be seconds to minutes, or they could be hours to days, although those are very rare at this point. But I think that's where people think it's going. And so, from a security perspective, the way I like to think about it is, there's kind of a grid. It's like, how much agency do I give something? And how smart actually is it? How capable is it? And, where you get into these real danger zones are what in the first version of the OWASP guidance we called excessive agency, which means I have a thing that's not that smart, but I'm giving it a lot of capability. I'm asking for trouble. I'm asking for security problems to happen. And that might be because it can access things inside my company or outside my company that are important, and it opens you up to risk and exposure. On the other hand, these agents the models underneath them are so much smarter than they were even 9 months ago, much less 2 years ago, that I can give them more interesting jobs. And so at Exabeam now, it used to be our co-pilot was an assistant, and if somebody had a question about something, they could ask the assistant. Now, when our low-level AI algorithms detect a problem, the agent runs off and does a complete security investigation and comes back with a report and presents it to the user, where it's, done a tremendous amount of work before it was asked. And I think those are the kind of use cases where it can be really powerful, as you do give it some initiative, but you have to be careful about how much actual agency you give it. And then you get into a lot of questions about, where do humans come into the loop? How much do you let it do supervised versus unsupervised?
I have a follow-up question there. A couple of years ago, I was doing some work with clients in aerospace, and hey, the biggest threat to our organization is not so much the external threats. They're big and significant too, but it's actually the insider threats of people that we already know are on the network, that are in the company, that are maybe in the four walls of the company, that have access to information and that they might funnel somewhere else for malicious purposes. Now, there have been tools to detect insider threats. There are things like data loss prevention, these kind of things. Now, all of a sudden, in addition to people, you have agents on your network that can do this, not just by clicking manually, but automating these things. There's not just one agent, but dozens or hundreds or thousands, if you will. Maybe they spawn new ones and what have you. How are organizations able to defend against those threats? How does security need to change? We've previously talked about zero trust architecture and these kind of things. How do all of these factors play into it?
So, by the way, that's a great question. First place to start is insider threats and compromised credentials, which are two sides of the same coin, are the hardest to detect, most insidious security threats that every CISO worries about. And classically, the vectors for those were, maybe you had a disgruntled employee, but more likely what you had is somebody who'd been the victim of a phishing attack, who lost their credentials, and then somebody is on your network who doesn't belong there. What's interesting about the agent ones is, as you do give, say, a set of agents the rights to do work on your behalf on your network, that does become its own side of insider risk. What I can tell you, though, is what I see in practice is the bar for what people call an agent right now, for what people are really deploying, is far lower. And, in a lot of cases, what they're saying is like, this doesn't mean that they're lesser. It just means they're, let's call them, less risky use cases. But even at that, we have to manage them. Somebody will say, hey, wouldn't it be great if we had an agent that was part of the HR department that could answer HR related questions for our employees? And what it is, it's kind of really a classic, call it kind of a co-pilot use case, but you give it all the policies and all the stuff nobody knows how to find and nobody knows how to read, and you hook it up with RAG and other things we've come to understand over the past couple of years, and you put it on the network where people can come to it and interact with it. And it doesn't have a huge amount of agency, but what it does have is access to potentially a lot of data. And that's where the first line of defense really comes in. And this is what I talk about with any of these LLM-based systems, is the first thing you need to think about is, how much data are you giving it access to? Because the first thing you have to understand is, even the more advanced models are not great at decision making. They are easy to trick. And if you give it access to data and your security defense is something in the system prompt that says, please don't give this information out, that is never going to work. It is never going to be sufficient. So the first line of defense is information management. You say, for my agent, what it needs to do its job, what's the minimal version of that job that it can do, and what's the minimum amount of data that it needs. And then you can do kind of a classic risk assessment around that. It then becomes, when you do get to these agents and you want them to do work, there could be one where it says, take that AI HR agent, for example, could be it now gets a set of actions that it can do. You're like, I would like to update my tax withholding. Well, there's a version of that you just give the agent access to the API set for Dayforce or whatever your HR system is, and you say, well, I'll just let it figure out the code to write when somebody asks to do something, and it can do it. And it could do anything that they could do, or worse yet, it could do anything the administrator could do. That's probably not a good idea, but what are the low risk actions that they could do that are undoable later or confirmable? Or does your request get queued up and prepared for somebody in HR to maybe just briefly review and approve, so they don't have to do the action, you don't have to get a hold of them, but it becomes kind of a broker with a human in the middle?
Now, as I'm listening to what you're sharing, I'm thinking, especially with things like agent-to-agent communication, multiple agents or multi-agent systems, what are the risks of one agent instructing another to reveal more than it's supposed to, right? It's A2A is a communication protocol. Like we have a protocol when humans speak. Usually when one person speaks, the other one listens and responds, and vice versa. But the information that is transported, what am I trying to get you to do, is a totally different one. So I hear information management is one critical piece, and locking down the amount of information in the systems and so on, not to expose it. What are you seeing when agents communicate with each other?
It's fascinating, because I think there's two kinds of protocols, and it's a big source of confusion. So it's worth outlining what the two big protocol categories are right now. And you've probably talked about one of the other ones on the show, but when you say agent to agent communication, and there's some of these emerging standards like A2A from Google, those are honestly seeing very limited adoption right now. There's a lot of experimentation going. I would say there's very little actual production usage of these things. The communication protocol, though, that has stormed the beaches and is being used everywhere, whether wisely or not, is tool usage protocols. And in particular, MCP, which is the Model Context Protocol. And so when people think about building agents, one of the ways that they now give their agents agency is they give them tools, right? It's classically, our LLM has just been a brain and a mouth, because it was a chatbot and that's all it could do. Now it has fingers.
Yes.
And that's the first thing to really look at, is if you're going to start to use MCP to give your agents fingers and hands, there's a lot of considerations there. There's a lot of security considerations. There's a lot that's been written on the topic of how do you think about what agency you give them, but also where do you get these tools from? And it adds a whole supply chain set of conditions. The thing I will say that I think is coming, though, when we look at agent to agent, the first hurdle to getting there is having more than one agent. I'd say the use cases where we see some agent to agent interactions are often completely internal with bespoke agents. So inside a company, I might have several agents that I might construct to build a swarm. It might be multiple instances of one agent. So one of the first places that we're seeing with this is writing code. And you see a lot of talk these days about spinning up basically multiple instances of an agent like Claude Code, which work together on a code base like a team of engineers, each taking different jobs out of a queue and processing those in parallel. I'd say that's one of the early places that we're starting to see this, is multiple kind of instances of the same agent working together. The next one is, within a company, bespoke agents that are in roles. And, within the product at Exabeam, we now have 3 or 4 different agent types in the product. They actually don't really interact with each other yet. They're more like custom agents for vertical use cases. I think the things that we're going to see develop, though, and this is where I think people should start to look, is the first thing that we're going to need is we're going to need reliable, basically discovery services for agents. You know, the thing that the internet needed before the web was really viable was it needed DNS. And we're starting to see ANS like proposals for, you know, hey, here's how I publish that I have an agent that can carry out certain kinds of services. What is promising about these is they're often much better thought out than DNS from a security perspective.
Sure.
You know, these early internet services, nobody took trust into account. And it's the reason that the internet is the train wreck that it is, you know, it was just designed to share information between universities. Why would you want to limit it?
Right. But see, I love that on one hand, these concepts are seeing a revival. I've also been talking about a central registry or discovery for agents for a bit, and seeing, you know, that this is materializing and maturing, I think is great. So at least this time around, with everything that we know over the last 50, 60, 70 years, we know how to make it better, right? And how to design for security first principles, at least in theory, we should know.
Yeah. But I think when you think about these multi-agent cases where your agent might be interacting with an untrusted third-party agent, a lot of the practices are going to be similar to interacting with untrusted humans. And, you know, today when we put our chatbot on the web or our agent on the web to interact with humans, you have to take this very hard zero trust approach that you're looking at guardrailing these things multiple ways. You know, one of the things that I put out in the last couple months was I created a new open source project that you can go find on GitHub called Steve's Chat Playground. And it's sort of the embodiment of the top 10 list in the book, where there's a set of chatbots and you can pick different chatbots, and some of them have built-in vulnerabilities. And there's checkboxes where you can install guardrails to look for prompt injection or look for unintended code generation on the back end. And if I'm building an agent that I want to interact with untrusted things, whether that's reading email that I'm getting from an untrusted source or taking API requests from an untrusted source, I need to be screening everything that I can using very traditional methods on the way in and the way out.
I like that. That's really, really practical. And I didn't know you had put out the playground, so I need to check that out myself. So it sounds like a great and helpful tool to see how additional guardrails strengthen your security there. Yeah. Now we've talked quite a bit about the things that can go wrong and where all the risks are, but I also want to make sure that we talk about the things that can actually go right when you bring agents into your business, when you look at security. What are you seeing there? How are companies doing that really, really well, that are embarking on their agentic AI journey, that are bringing some agents or maybe some more agents in?
So I think there's two big categories to think about when I talk to people about their approach to this. And there's, you know, I'll put it in, I work at a big company and I'm trying to figure out how to make my company better. And then like all the way at the other extreme, it's like, how could I make my company act like a big company, even though it's not? And there are two very different approaches that may involve a lot of the technology stack. But let's talk about what I'll call the hard case first, which is I have a battleship and I'm trying to steer it. I work at a global 2000 company and I see my smaller competitors moving faster, doing things that are AI native, and, you know, deploying some of these agentic technologies in efficient ways. And I think what you do see are these very vertical agent stacks that are starting to become productive. The coding one is by far the most mature, even though it's by far the scariest and the one with the most agency, so to speak. But you know, we've had cases in, you know, cases I've been involved with at our own company where we have We have one product has a 20-year-old code base. It is the snarliest, scariest thing. And there are parts of that code base no human wanted to touch. But it was problematic. There were things the customers didn't like. And we had one brave engineer weighed in with Claude code and a positive attitude. Came back 4 weeks later with this thing rewritten in ways people never thought. They thought, man, if I dedicated a team of 10 for 3 months to it, I don't know that I could do it. And they went in and they did something, and it meant something to the business. And we're doing more and more of that now. And I know people across companies are doing that with the software development piece. All the way over on the marketing side, we've seen people generating marketing collateral forever. What we're just on the early part of is things like agent-based sales prospecting. It's your main sales manager persona. That's like one of the most expensive single units that you have at the company. These people may make $1 million a year. You don't want them cold calling things on the phone. So traditionally, you had given them 1 or 2 low-level assistants who would place their calls and coordinate meetings. We're starting to see the ability to replace those or accelerate those, and that kind of leads me to that other case, which is I want to be a one-person startup, and we hear multiple people talk about it. We will see a $1 billion valuation company coming out of one human soon, surrounded by agents, and we're going to see, somebody who has an idea for the product, and they're going to use agents to build the first version of the product. They're going to use agents to sell the first version of the thing that they build, and they're going to use software to do the basic compliance needs that they have for filing your taxes and those basic things. And those are all within reach, and we see people really doing that. And I think we know we're in the place where we've crossed a line where we see what I'll call 20-person startups who are well over $1 billion valuation, and that would never have been possible 2 years ago. We're on our way to a 1-person startup.
That's pretty exciting, right? Having all these capabilities at your fingertips, and whether it's something that you build yourself or it's a collection of different tools that you assemble, and certainly if you're a 1-person startup, right? It's pretty straightforward. They're pretty short communication pathways between your head and your hands, probably.
Yeah.
So just seeing where that goes. Nonetheless, right, at some point they also need to think about security and how to secure the data that they generate, that users give them, and so on.
You do, and I know that we see that. Look, vibe coding is part of this, and there have been so much controversy out there about the security of vibe coded things. The one piece of hope I will give everybody, having worked in what they call AppSec for years, which is just the industry that helps people secure their code, is the code that gets written today by teams of humans is not secure, by and large. We try, and we should try, and we fight that battle, but that battle is hard, and humans are bad at writing secure code. So what agents let us do is often what humans do much faster. The piece of hope that I have going forward is there's so much investment in these AI-aided coding things. What I could never get the human coders to do was really care about security. They want to build new stuff. They want to build exciting stuff. They want to build new features. The bots don't really want to do anything. And if while we're training them, we incent them to write secure code, they'll write secure code. And I think in the next year or 2 years, we will rapidly cross the point where he said, I don't want the humans doing the securing of the code. I want the next generation of AppSec tools, which are artificially intelligent, to be the ones fixing those bugs, not the humans.
Talk about rapid development in that space, right? Speaking of rapid, seems like the last half hour has gone by in no time. Steve, I was wondering if you could summarize the key 3 takeaways for our audience today before we wrap up.
Sure. So I think first things first, understand the level of agency that you are giving to your agents. Once you move past just being a mouth and the thing has fingers, think about what you're allowing that to do on your behalf and what mechanism is it going to use to do that. Think about the intelligence level that your bot has. It's just as likely for you to get yourself in a high-risk situation by the bot making a bad decision as being attacked by a malicious third party. But the malicious case makes it even harder. So you really need to think about, what data do I have access to? What privileges am I giving it to execute on those decisions? And then the third one, though, is be aware of the opportunities, because the opportunities are massive. You can't look at the first two and say, we don't know how to fully secure these systems, so I'm just going to ignore it. You do that and your name's going to be Blockbuster or Sears Roebuck in a few years. You need to start to learn how to do this. Just be really conscious about those things in terms of data access and agency levels, find appropriate use cases, and start to move forward. And I think you can change the trajectory of your business.
I love that. It's very tangible advice, sums up our conversation really, really well. Steve, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your experience with us again. I'm always amazed how quickly this topic of security evolves and what all the different aspects are that now come into focus. So I hope for those of you in the audience, you already also have a better understanding of it. So Steve, again, thank you so much.
Thanks, Andres. Always a pleasure.
Wonderful. All right, folks, see you next time for another episode of What's the Buzz. Bye-bye.